All right, this is an emergency update of the highest level of importance, DEFCON 2 and climbing. One of these days, I'm going to make a video. Unbeknownst to me, it's going to be my last because there's going to be a power outage, an internet cyber attack, EMP, grid down style event, or perhaps, and perhaps more likely, it's going to be just a martial law crackdown and I'm going to get swept up in one of Trudeau's censorship dragnets. Maybe it's going to be a mushroom cloud, but the day is fast approaching. I'm 100% confident that we are but seconds away from midnight in relative terms. The intensification of hostilities around the world in the last 24 hours is astonishing. We're seeing geometric escalation in the Middle East, and it's happening just like we said it would, which is scary because what we say happens next is even worse. Now, I'm going to enumerate all the headlines, and after I do that, we're going to talk about a nightmare NATO scenario that I believe they're holding on to as a Plan B contingency, and it involves a decapitation strike on the Kremlin using nuclear weapons. And they're doing these big arrow maneuvers right now that suggest that these are not exercises, okay? We always joke about there are no military exercises, only World War III disguises, but this starts to really look like something. And I'm going to provide all the details. Now, first, let's talk about what's happened in the last 24. One of the biggest pieces of news is that Iran has joined the conflict. Iran has launched missiles, the longest range ballistic missiles that they've ever launched in their history from their territory. No longer is it IRGC-backed militias. This is Iran launching ballistic missiles against Syrian targets, while Israeli-backed, US-backed, Mossad-affiliated, according to the Iranian targets, in Syria. This is big. This is a massive escalation. In addition to that, the Houthis have targeted a U.S. commercial vessel, and it was actually a hit this time. It was not deflected. It was not shot down. They were able to target a commercial vessel. That means, you guessed it, more escalation in the Middle East. Now, prior to Iran firing the longest range missiles they've ever fired in their history, get a load of this. The Iranian foreign minister gets off the phone with the Russian foreign minister. They finalize a deal for a strategic partnership. What does that mean? Well, it ostensibly means that what we've been saying all along, in that Iran is quite possibly now under the Russian nuclear umbrella. If you want to talk about a Gog versus Magog biblical scenario for all you Christian eschatologists out there, you guys know I'm an agnostic, but I throw you a bone every once in a while. There you have it. It doesn't get more Gog, Magog than that. You now have the Iranians and the Russians potentially aligned along nuclear lines who are about to go to war with Israel and the United States. And who's in the back seat? The North Koreans and the Chinese. Guys, what I'm about to share with you today, I'm telling you, it gave me chills when I came to this realization about what may come from this point forward. There were many other events that happened in the last 24 hours in the Middle East. I'll give you all the details in just a moment. But I also want to move up to Europe because some big things have been happening up there as well. Lots of military equipment moving towards the Belarusian border in Poland. Now, apparently, I got a message from a very well-informed subscriber who always provides me intel, great intel, and they were informing me that the Polish armed forces are going to be calling up about 250,000 reservists who have to show up at a local military recruitment center to be assigned to specific posts and military units for the purpose of any future mobilization. Poland has done a lot as of late on the low with respect to making the process of going into full-blown war mobilization mode all the easier. In addition to that, you have some of the biggest military exercises in NATO's history, the biggest military exercise, 41,000 troops. Of those, you're going to see 20,000 UK troops. That's like half their army. Well, I'm being a little facetious, but it's a big chunk of their army. That's just from the UK, okay? Steadfast Defender is about to take place in spring. This is going to coincide with what the Institute for the Study of War says is Russia's Big Arrow offensive maneuver that they're about to do in Ukraine, and it's going to involve sending paratroopers in behind enemy lines because, of course, now the fortifications are too strong. But I think what the Russians have realized is that the Ukrainians have run out of air defensive ammo, or at least in terms of the last volley, unless it was some sort of Napoleonic feint, they were able to get like 90% of their missiles through, which is incredibly rare. Now, the other big event, before I forget, that happened in the last 24 hours, and this is huge, the Russians allegedly, according to the commander of the Ukrainian military, official sources on the Ukrainian side, and unofficial Telegram-based sources on the Russian side, they claim the Russians have lost an AWACS plane, which is a reconnaissance and surveillance plane. This is a very large, very expensive plane, and they are very rare. Now, the thing that's so suspicious about this is that these things don't just fly around the war zone. In fact, this was, I believe, in the Sea of Azov, which is outside of, the Ukrainian mainland. And so what many people are saying is, how could they have possibly shot this down? Because the Patriots don't necessarily have the range. Some people are saying, well, they are within range if the Patriot system is really close to, the borderlands and the demarcation, the unofficial demarcation line where it's basically a stalemate for all intents and purposes. And this is very suspicious. It's very concerning that the Russians have lost this plane. Have the Ukrainians been given some technology that is undisclosed in order for them to target this plane? This is a massive escalation. In addition to that, an Ilyushin plane was damaged in the tail end. The pilots were able to land it. This is one of Russia's, this is what they use for their doomsday planes, okay? The Ilyushin planes. So they're very expensive planes as well. But that was a massive escalation in and of itself. And I'm going to explain why all this mobilization business in Poland and these massive exercises being planned, I think this is all a part of getting NATO ready for a potential decapitation strike. Here's the thing. And one thing, I don't agree with Joel Skousen on everything, but I do agree with one thing. He says that the only way a country is going to, he's the guy who wrote the book Strategic Relocation. We've had him on a guest on many times on the channel before. His theory is that the only way nuclear war happens is if the initiator of that nuclear conflict has a sizable enough army to go in thereafter and do occupation duty. Because the risk is, if you try to do a decapitation strike and either you're unsuccessful or even if you are successful, eventually people are going to want revenge. So you have to have a sizable enough force to go and occupy thereafter. So where should I begin with this? NATO is assembling a combat readiness force. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about Day X, the Day X exercise that the Germans are preparing for. Now, we're hearing about X, Disease X, Day X. If you don't know what Day X is, don't worry. I'm going to explain it in just a moment. X is in Twitter, SpaceX, Model X, all these X's. X basically symbolizes uncertainty. So the WEF is talking about Disease X that has a 20 times kill rate, and Germany is talking about Day X. Now, according to a leaked document, the German army has begun to prepare for an attack that Russia may launch on NATO's eastern flank next winter. A secret Ministry of Defense training document discusses how war might break out. I mean, this is absolutely insane. get a load of this. According to the scenario here, Russia will declare a new mobilization in February of 2024 and recruit 200,000. That's this year, by the way. That's 200,000 more people that they're going to recruit. Now, Russia has an election in March of 2024. It's on the 17th, to be exact. I believe Belarus is either before that or shortly after that. Why would they do a mass mobilization before that? There are certain reasons why they might want to do it beforehand. A lot of people, especially in and around the Moscow region, are probably becoming incredibly dissatisfied with the lack of aggressiveness on the part of Putin in terms of how he's prosecuting this conflict in Ukraine. They want him to do more, okay? They're seeing power outages. You're seeing all these videos come out of frozen apartment buildings and burst pipes, and Moscow is just having one hell of a winter. It's not good. People are pissed. They're seeing fires that we've been reporting on for several weeks. They're seeing acts of sabotage behind enemy lines. There's an argument to be made that maybe some people in Russia want a larger mobilization, and they want the Russians to take the gloves off and start using the big guns. Now, if you go by that argument, then it makes sense to have the mobilization before the election, because that might actually boost Putin's approval. But, you know, I think logic would dictate that you would do something like that after the election. So anyways, they hypothesized that this would come before the election. Taking advantage of the West's faltering aid to Ukraine, Russia is attacking Ukraine again, and they may make major gains by June of 2024. This would coincide with the Institute for the Study of War suggestion that the Russians are about to do a major blitzkrieg-style offensive, okay? Then they're concerned that after that, after they get a handle in Ukraine, and this is where it starts to get a little loopy, they think that the Russians are going to launch a hybrid attack on the West. In the first place, cyber attacks will take place, and then ethnic Russians who are in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and possibly even the 2 million German ethnic Russians are going to, at least some of them maybe, be conscripted to start creating a stir. In those regions, we know that those Baltic state companies are already starting to ostracize a lot of the ethnic Russian community there. They're starting to put a lot of restrictions on what they can do, what they can buy, whether they can bring cars in, whether they can travel in certain places. And so that they think that this is going to escalate into a major conflict, okay? Russia will turn the conflicts and crises in this geography into opportunities and create excuses, and will carry out the Zapad 24 exercise with 50,000 soldiers in the western regions of Russia and Belarus. Now, why Belarus is so important is because right now you see all this mobilization going on in Poland. This steadfast defender exercise, I do believe, is going to be largely taking place in Poland. The UK is sending 20,000 troops to Poland. Again, there are no military exercises, only World War III disguises. Are they preparing for a showdown in and around Belarus? Now, the exercise will be used to gather troops on the Polish and Lithuanian border. There you go. So both of these things seem to be coinciding at the exact same time. They say that Russia is going to deploy troops and medium-range missiles to Kaliningrad in October, citing a possible NATO attack. Taking advantage of U.S. President Biden's election loss, so they're predicting an election loss, the U.S. lack of leadership for a few weeks, Russia will repeat its invasion of Ukraine in 2014, this time on NATO territory. Now, if this happens, then I don't know what sort of continuity of government, I don't know how that would factor into an election, but it gets more interesting. Russia will dispatch additional military units into the Baltic region and Belarus in March of 2025, claiming that the West is preparing to attack Russia at meetings held at the UN. Now, we know how projection works. We know how mirroring works in combat. Are they just telling us what their plan actually is? Which when we're seeing these videos of equipment, train loads of American vehicles moving towards the border with Belarus in Kaliningrad, is that what they're actually preparing? So they're saying that NATO will make deterrence measures and act against the main Russian offensive from Belarus and Kaliningrad in May of 2025. And the general commander will order 300,000 soldiers, which will include 30,000 Germans, to be sent to NATO's eastern flank on what they're calling Day X. Now, of course, all of this would assume that we're going to see nukes fly at some point or the other. But how does this factor into a decapitation strike? These piddly amounts of troops, like a 300,000 combat readiness force, for perspective, in World War II, if you take what the Russians had and the Germans had, you're talking like 15 million troops, active duty troops. At any given time, the Russians had 9 to 10 million troops, the Germans 5 to 8 million troops. Okay, these are the numbers you need in order to occupy a territory. You might not need that many numbers if you're planning on doing some sort of massive decapitation strike, and if you have saboteurs on the inside and you have good human intelligence, which we know they do inside Russia. We know there's lots of acts of sabotage. We know there's a partisan movement. There are defectors there, turncoats. If you can mobilize and muster those forces, and you do some sort of nuclear decapitation strike on Russia's nuclear triad, and all of these operations, the bombing of or the taking out of the Ilyushin plane, or the attempt in the AWACS plane, the targeting of Moscow, the targeting of the nuclear triad, airports, the Kremlin, St. Petersburg, all of the military facilities in the border regions, these could all be seen as probing operations, trying to find the weak points. And slowly but surely, you almost start to think that, is this whole Ukrainian operation just an intelligence gathering operation? Are the Ukrainians being sacrificed so we can get our tentacles as deep inside Russia as possible, so to allow for the most efficient first strike while minimizing possible collateral damage? This might explain, because of course the Russians would be aware of this plan. This would explain Russia's rapid strategic nuclear buildup that we're seeing, and the rapid deployment and rollout of all the submarines and the different types of missiles and the new ICBMs. And just to add to this, okay, the reason why they would do this, and people would say, well, why would they bother doing this? It all comes down to China. This is the key in the hypothesis, is that in order to defeat the Chinese, you have to cut China off of energy. If you're really talking about going to war with the Chinese, what is their energy source? Well, it's the Russians. If you can get a hold of Russian resources and you can install a puppet government in Russia, you can effectively deny China access to the resources that it's going to need to fight you with. Okay, but so long as Russia is there and you have Putin at the helm of that ship, that's not going to happen, because the Russians and the Chinese have a strategic alliance, much like they're developing with the Iranians and the North Koreans. Now, more evidence of this is the lack of mobilization of conventional forces. While they are increasing military expenditures, while we do see them starting to boost ammunition production and mobilize and militarize, especially in Poland, not so much in the other countries, it still seems insufficient for the task at hand. You think that, knowing what they know about the attritional rates of the Ukrainians, we would have mobilized long ago, especially considering the negative impact it's having on the European economy in terms of their ability not to get gas. And now you have all this stuff in the Middle East with the Houthis. You would think that they would be going on a greater conventional war footing. Well, why aren't they doing that? Is it because they're banking on this Plan B contingency? Do they have some sort of trick up their sleeve. You also have the forward deployment of numerous different types of forces. You have Finland closing the border. You have the policing of the Baltic Sea. You have the forward deployment of F-35s in the UK. And I was going to read an article today that talks about a military base in the UK that people are starting to complain because of all the activity there. And this military base is renowned for its nuclear facilities and the fact that this is where they keep the U.S. nuclear weapons. And the U.S. will be sending F-35s that will be armed with tactical nuclear weapons if need be to the UK. They're doing all kinds of training so that they can distribute these assets and they can get them ready to be deployed from highways if the need arises, because you don't have all your forces concentrated at one time. At the same time, you have this urgent deployment of aircraft carriers to the Pacific. So there's going to be 4 aircraft carrier strike groups at the same time in and around South Korea, all the way down to the Philippines and Taiwan. Now, one of those, the USS Carl Vinson, is going to be heading back to port, I believe. But still, 3 aircraft carriers in the Pacific theater, that tells you something's about to go down there as well. We know that they're sending a delegation to Taiwan. So they're provoking everybody on all fronts. And everything could honestly flare up at the same time. In the Middle East, you have this microcosm where you have this axis that's loosely coordinating their activities to try to attrit the Israelis and the Americans, in that you have Hamas, they do their attack, Hezbollah attacks a little bit, the Houthis attack a little bit, the militias in Syria and Iraq attack a little bit, and now Iran is attacking, right? And on the whole, you got to look at the big picture, the macro picture. The same thing is happening. You have the Russians making a move. You have the Chinese making a move. You have the North Koreans making a move. So the U.S. is just like whack-a-mole, all these problems that they're trying to put out fires. So in addition to this, some other data points for your consideration, okay? We have medical shortages right now. For some reason, there's medical shortages around the world. You would think that supply chains have corrected themselves. Are they stockpiling medications covertly? We know that the wholesale food places and the MRE distribution centers are pumping out food 24/7 to try to keep up with all these military deployments in the U.S. Are they stockpiling this stuff for a potential major war? The reason why I'm so concerned is that this combat readiness force, these numbers that they're putting up, that they're planning on sending to the Baltic states, they only make sense if you're planning on doing a non-conventional decapitation strike, where you could send in thousands of special forces. Afterwards, you install your puppet government, you get rid of Putin. There's probably going to be a nuke or two that flies, or 3 or 4 or several hundred, most likely. But what if this is their only backup plan? Because the writing is on the wall, right? It's either, if you're looking at this from a neoconservative, Amerocentric perspective, once the US dollar dies, it's not like it's going to be the end of the world, but it is going to be the end of a lot of multinational ventures. And I'm very concerned about this scenario, guys. I think that this is one possible. Now, I don't think this is the most probable scenario. I think what they want to do is try to attrit the Russians, and they're putting up these deterrent forces. But what is incredibly suspicious is this steadfast defender exercise, which is the biggest since the Cold War, where it's taking place, everything else that is being positioned in the background. It does not look good. North Korea recently announced that they have tested a hypersonic missile with a 1,000-kilometer range. So that situation continues to evolve or devolve. The doomsday clock is going to be unveiled in a few days, so we'll see what the International Bulletin for Atomic Scientists has to say. The UK plans on, like I say, sending 20,000 service personnel to participate in one of NATO's largest military exercises since the Cold War. It's going to include an aircraft carrier, 8 warships, and the RAFs, and this is the Royal Navy aircraft carrier, as well as an F-35 Lightning aircraft. And there's a lot of controversy right now surrounding UK's access to the Black Sea. They really want to get into a war with Russia. And one of the concerns with the AWACS plane was, did NATO help Ukraine take out this AWACS plane? If that is the case, then this is a potential escalation, right? According to the Institute for the Study of War, American analysts suggest that the Russian armed forces intend to conduct operations with landings from helicopters and rapid deployment of personnel, as was the case during February 24th of 2022. Only this time, I guess they suspect that the Ukrainian air defense is going to be diminished. But if the Ukrainians were incredibly smart, they might be feigning weakness so to make the Russians think that they're weak, and then they're just going to blast all these helicopters and planes that these guys are jumping from out of the sky. I mean, that's a possibility, right? I briefly talked about the Iranian and Russian strategic cooperation, and it appears as though that is the case. So if that's the case, then you know that the Russian-Israeli divide is about to widen. Residents living in Oxfordshire village of Bryce Norton have expressed their fears over a potential nuclear attack. And where is this coming from? Due to the nearby airbase's role in receiving transports of materials from the U.S. for use in Britain's nuclear weapons. RAF Bryce Newton is Britain's largest RAF station with 6,000 personnel and staff. Cooperation with the U.S. has been vital in maintaining its nuclear weapons for decades. And apparently, residents saying not only do they have to cope with the noise of regular flights operating from the busy airbase nearby, they also have to contend with huge convoys of blacked-out Tories, police riot vans, ambulances, and other trucks which regularly rumble through their small village and which locals believe carry nuclear weapons and nuclear waste, and they're probably not wrong. Speaking to the Sun newspaper, many residents expressed their frustration at how they are treated by police when the convoys are passing through, including having guns pulled on them and being forced to pull over, which is understandable. It's a national security threat, but I can see how that'd be a pain in the ass. Most shocking of all is that many now fear that the RAF Bryce Newton role in transporting nuclear materials will make it a high priority target in the event of a nuclear war with Russia. And apparently this activity is ramped up at this airbase. Israel in the Jerusalem Post put this article out today, and we're seeing the same playbook play out. Go back and read some articles that precipitated the Iraq War and the WMD scare. I still think we're a little ways away from them being able to say with certainty that Iran has a WMD. And now, of course, you have this strategic partnership with Russia. So was this a flex by the Iranians to say, hey, we can do what we want now. We're under the nuclear umbrella. You can't touch us. And if you do, then we're going to start bringing in the big guns. And surprisingly, the U.S. has been quiet. Although, just because the U.S. hasn't responded yet, and just because the U.S. has downplayed the attacks on the commercial vessel, the loss of the lives of the 2 SEALs who are allegedly trying to, the Navy SEALs, they were trying to board retake a vessel that was hijacked by either the Houthis or the Iranians. I can't remember which one. There's just so many incidents. But either way, a couple of them died, and they're trying to really diminish and minimize the effects of these Houthi attacks, yet at other times, they're blowing it up in the media, right? Like it's a big deal. So are they trying to diminish the effects because either they're not ready to attack yet or they're seriously scared? They seriously know that they're in a quagmire and there's no way out, and they're trying now to, basically Israel's calling the shots in the Middle East and rolling with whatever it is whatever sort of hornets Israel kicks up, because, of course, the Houthis have said we're not going to stop until you completely remove yourself from the Gaza Strip. Israel has removed a couple divisions. A lot of people think that's just to give them some R&R and possibly move them up to the north. But either way, Israel is now saying that Israel is growing in their concern about Iran's nuclear ambitions. Okay, it suggests that some people used to doubt Iran's willingness to use nuclear weapons against Israel, but recent events have reduced those doubts. They're talking about the public. They're talking about doing a proactive offensive action as being essential to prevent such a scenario. And of course, the Israelis and the Americans have trained for this eventuality for some time. There is a belief that a nuclear-armed Iran might use nuclear weapons as a part of its Neo-Persian Empire ambitions. Okay, maybe whatever. Maybe that's all just propaganda. Who knows? The article raises concerns that the international community may react hypocritically if Israel were to execute a nuclear counterstrike. I'm pretty sure that nobody in the world is going to bat an eye if Iran nukes Israel and they nuke Iran back. I don't think anybody, even people who are, pro-Palestinian, can say much about that. If Iran nukes you and you nuke them back, then that's pretty justified. That's pretty proportionate. It suggests that Iran may employ tactics like an electromagnetic pulse attack on Israel to disrupt its infrastructure. The article discusses the potential devastating impact of an Iranian EMP first strike. It raises the possibility of an Iran developing tactical nuclear weapons and the complexities of countering such a threat. And remember, the price of nuclear materials is the highest it's been in like 15 years. It is skyrocketing. I think that there is some, in addition to the refound interest in nuclear energy, I do think that there's covert nuclear weapons programs that are currently being developed that's driving the price of uranium up. I truly believe that. Margarita Simonian, the editor-in-chief of Russia Today, and I can tell by her body language that she's not joking anymore. She used to kind of speak tongue-in-cheek about this when she talked about World War III, but neither her nor Lukashenko, as I expressed in our last daily update, is messing around anymore. And this is a terrifying statement that she made. Whether a world war breaks out now or a little later depends on whether Washington thinks that it will be useful to them now, before the elections, or after. Judging by the gleeful silence of the American media, they're still deciding. So what she is saying, it doesn't matter who gets elected, whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden or somebody else, that these wars are inevitably going to intensify. And while some people might believe, and not to get too political on this channel, but a lot of people are very starry-eyed and they think that one person, one demagogue is going to be able to solve all their problems. I don't believe that one iota. I'm sorry, I just don't play that tribalistic game. You elect a mascot of a team, you don't elect the owner, okay? So anyway, some people think that Trump's going to go in there and he's going to make a deal, right? Maybe, but what if he inherits a situation where, he has that go mode, that aggressive type A personality as well. And if you put that in a climate where it's relative peace and civility, it can work out good. It can be a deterrent. But if you insert that kind of guy into an environment that's chaotic on the brink of World War III and everybody's attacking us, then it can actually be worse. Things could escalate faster. Now, again, I'm not saying, vote for anybody. I'm just saying that don't think that whoever gets put in power is going to walk us back from this. There is no, because it's a material scarcity, resource contraction, it's a deglobalization, multipolar objective reality. It doesn't matter who you put in the driver's seat. There's going to be problems. It's just a matter of basically how much money are we going to spend on the military and where you're going to move all your equipment. What else can I talk about? I think that's about it today, guys. We're going to see what happens in the Middle East in the next 24 hours, but I have a feeling it is going to continue to be very eventful. If you missed the video that we did yesterday, where we had Kai, the radiation guy, talk all about nuclear matters, he showed us how these radiation scintillators, that's what they're called, scintillators, okay? This is the best scintillator Geiger counter on the market, made here in Canada, in the warehouse next door, in fact. And he explains how it works and why it's the best suited for a post-nuclear disaster situation. A lot of these Geiger counters that you buy off Amazon, they're not made for what you think they're made for. They're not made for a nuclear war scenario. A lot of it involves the measurement range, okay? They don't provide you a good enough range, and they can actually end up doing more harm than good. It's got a focus here for you guys. And this one was tailor-made for the purpose of detecting post-SHTF Mad Max nuclear radiation. It's small, it's portable, it's incredibly robust, and you can only get them at CanadianPreparedness.com. And because we don't have an army of Chinese workers or robots, we only have a few. So get them while they last. In fact, I think most of these are sold. We're just still pretty backed up from Boxing Day. And yeah, believe it or not, we had a lot of orders come through on Boxing Day, so that's keeping everybody busy. I think we're getting into this year's orders now, but it's been a grind, but we're going to try to get that out to you as quickly as possible. And as I always say, if the shit hits the fan, I will ride it out to you postman style on my horse, okay? Anyways, guys, take care. I'm sure by the time I upload this video, there's going to be another major event, so just keep on prepping, because we've approached the geometric phase of SHTF. So stay tuned and stay ready. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.